we're like scratching the surface of like our capacity as people. We are like operating here, most of us. We probably could be operating here. But in operating here is not necessarily doing things all the time, but sometimes it's like literally creating the space to let good ideas come to you.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
All right, welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring innovators, disruptors, and creators who are breaking through the status quo to change the way business happens today. My name is Michael Johnson. I'm here with my co-host Tyler Kelly, and we are at Venture Cafe Miami today, and we are very excited to have Milka Milliance with us today.
I'm super excited too. Just like reading a little bit of what you do has just like inspired me. So for the listening audience, Milka has worked with leadership teams of global companies as a consultant, coach, and designing and developing interventions to implement strategic initiatives across global organizations. She designs and facilitates learning interventions that create opportunities to course correct for busy professionals who often have the competence but may be lacking in the courage, confidence, and collaboration pieces of the leadership puzzle. And she believes that we must find our inner heroine by creating the spaces to explore our beliefs around power, courage, confidence, and collaboration. She's the CEO and founder of We Are Artemis Leadership. And she's also an author of a book called Your Journey to Self-Redefinition, A Woman's Guide to Transitions. Welcome, Milka. This is amazing.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Tyler. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So, redefining yourself, like redefining yourself as a woman, like where did that idea, that passion, that initial,
right?
Where'd that come from?
So essentially, this book, Your Journey to Self-Redefinition, was really my own journey. It was the heroine's journey is my journey. It's a journey towards self-actualization. And it's a path that you take when you decide at some point that you've been going in a direction that you were not really sure why you were going in that direction, whether it was you were busy just being busy, you were working, you were aspiring to achieve, goal after goal after goal. But then one day you get up and you realize, why am I doing these things? And it wasn't clear to me. And so at the time I was living in New York, and I was in a relationship, and I was working really hard, but often felt really unhappy. And actually I was miserable in my life. And so in leaving the corporate world and deciding to go off on my own, to start my own business, and to doing it in a way that I felt was true to myself, I had to take a step back. And that was essentially the beginning of this journey for me, which led to me writing this book and then also building a business around supporting other people, whether it's men or women, although I primarily work with women, but supporting people to really start taking a step back and reevaluating their lives in a more holistic way. And I do that, in different ways. I do it through coaching. I do it through workshops on an individual level, but I also do it for organizations as well.
So have you found that that's a pretty typical story that you hear from people? Like your story, is that everyone else's story too? That seems like a weird question, but.
It is a weird question because I think there are two sides to it. I would say yes and no. Where I think I've seen other people who've come to a realization that they weren't happy the way they were living. And it's not just about being happy for the sake of being happy, but when you reach a point where like you're so miserable, you're like in pain. Like you get up every day and you're so unhappy and you're in pain with what you're doing, emotionally, psychologically. At some point, you're on a collision course. And so for me, I was lucky to get off that collision course before it was too late. And often for some people is they end up doing things that end up hurting themselves long run, whether it's addiction, drug abuse, or whatever. But for me, I was lucky enough to find myself in a place that I just walk away. I got up and I just walked away from it all.
So you got up, you walked away, and then what? Like in terms of like, did you discover like some some knowledge that did you find something out about yourself that you hadn't found out
I did.
prior to?
I did. I learned, well, first of all, the then what was I took a sabbatical. For like 9 months, I traveled. I was living in New York at the time, but I still lived in my apartment, and I traveled, and I was in Europe for a while. And from there, I ended up, I came back, and I also realized that first of all, how resilient I was, and that it took a lot of courage to do that in the first place. Because a lot of people would reach out to me like, wow, I can't believe you're doing this. You actually walked away from your big consulting job. And I was like, yeah, I did. Mm-hmm. And so I saw other people were in awe, or they were scared, or there were a lot of more feelings about it than I did, which I thought was really funny. And I think some people were nervous for me, because they're like, well, you don't know what you're going to find on the other side. But for me, what I learned about myself these last few years is not only, that courage begins with one step. It really does. You know that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step? It's the truth. It takes one step, and then another and another. And each time you take a step, you feel stronger. You feel like you can do things more, and you take some risks. And sometimes you fail at something, but you try to go a different direction. So that's really been how I've approached, kind of pretty much reinventing myself. So the self-redefinition is self-reinvention. It's deciding, okay, I don't like this. I'm going to make a drastic decision and then just change everything around, knowing that I will be okay. I will get through the other side, and I will be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I can very much identify with that, because and maybe you can as well, because I think this is a similar story that a lot of entrepreneur people face, because I remember the day where I walked away from what I was doing and quit my day job, and have family go, what are you doing? This is really scary. And to me, the unknown was more exciting to me than my known that I had at that time.
It's funny, because I always tell people I operate in areas of gray, and also in nuances, and I'm okay with ambiguity. And it's what you're saying, I was also okay with the unknown, because the unknown was actually way more appealing than the known, because the known was already scary and then traumatic for me at the time. Yeah. So for me, it was just a sense of relief. But I also felt like, over the years, and along the way, I started developing the right coping skills, to learn how to navigate situations like this, which is what I do on a day-to-day basis with a client, is helping people to really learn how to step back and just take stock and start thinking about how do you actually create a process for yourself that allows you to approach something that seems very difficult and very complex, but you can approach it in a way that you land softly. And essentially, it's the same process that I used as a consultant when I was working in strategy consulting. I just took it and I used it, and I use it in a different way now. So
in some of your materials, you talk about what I would call a trance state, but walking and sleepwalking, right? Is this state that we're in just as humans. It's it's a condition of humanity, I think, right?
Yeah.
How do we recognize that?
Especially now with technology, we all love technology, and it's great, right? These tools are there to enable us. They're there to help us, be more effective at what we do. I'm essentially an anthropologist, and so I'm always very fascinated about how people use tools, how tools, they're not just an end in themselves. They're a means to an end. They help us to do things better. But I feel that right now, we're in a very interesting time in history where there's a confluence of so much technology. It's moving so quickly, we can't keep up with it. On the one hand, we have these tools, but on the other hand, it's almost like when you can't put your phone down, and we're all guilty of it. We're you can't, have a conversation with someone without looking every other second, or you check your email 500 times a day. You start getting in a state of trance, and also you're almost automated to do certain things. It becomes it's a reflex to just constantly, be connected, but at the same time you're around other people, and there really is no connection, at least amongst humans. And so that's something that fascinates me, and that I think, more and more, the more we can be intentional about, using technology in a way that enables us rather than keeps us from connecting with each other, the better we'll be in the long run. If we're not self-aware of that, I'm concerned that it will become a bigger issue for us.
You're talking about a lot of us kind of being in that sleepwalking trance state, but why is it important to break out of that? Because I mean, if I'm living my life, I'm happy.
Right.
I don't know. Why is it important to break ourselves out of those patterns?
I think it's important because I think it's hard to create. It's hard to be innovative. It's hard to be inspired, to be moved when you don't allow yourself the time and the space to have those moments in life. When you think about that, and to me, why that's important is because if we don't still allow for these serendipitous moments in life, we're going to just be creating tools that they're just either talking to themselves or they become self-referential, right? And so in a way, it limits our own ability to find ways to keep our own humanity intact, right? So for me, the reason why I think it's important is because we will not continue to effectively create, because there are a lot of things that we can continue to create and be inspired to create, because I'm sorry, all of our needs have not been met. They have not. And it would be arrogant on our end to think that they have. But if we're not allowing ourselves to still, be in awe of whether it's nature or it's the environment that you're in. I mean, so for me, one of the first things I did actually when after I resigned from my job in New York is I went on a retreat because I knew I needed that. I needed to rest. Because I was getting on a plane every Monday and getting home on Friday mornings, sometimes Thursday nights. And I did that for 4 years and it was exhausting. And so I just needed a deep rest. So I went on a retreat for 1 week. And that's actually how this whole concept of this business and the work that I do came about. It was during the retreat. I didn't bring my computer and I'm so happy I didn't. I actually love books. I didn't bring any books either. I didn't bring anything. I just brought my clothes and shoes. That's it. So I could go running or whatever, but my sneakers. Because I wanted to give myself the time while I was out in nature. It was a beautiful place called Omega Learning Center in upstate New York. It's a really nice retreat space. I highly recommend it. So I went there for a week. And I was really lucky. I was in this beautiful cottage that they put me up in. And while I was there, I had nothing to do one night. I was just sitting there and I was like, I have nothing to do. I went for a walk and then I pulled out a book from the library. And the book was a psychological book, actually based on the idea of these goddess archetypes. And archetypes are patterns, right? They're essentially they're patterns of behavior of people. And each archetype represents an aspect of a woman's personality and sense of self. And there were 7. And I identified with one of them immediately. And it was the Artemis archetype. So I don't know if you realize this, but the Artemis archetype is the archetype that Katniss Everdeen and the Hunger Games. That's the Artemis, the huntress, she has a bow and arrow. That's the archetype. And we see it surfacing more and more actually in a lot of movies right now, movies for women, movies about female characters. It's a very strong archetype. It's about, championing women, but also, championing, saving the environment, conserving the environment, and just humanity. And I really identified with that. And at some point I was just and I basically did not sleep that night. I read the whole book. The book was this thick. I read it. I did not sleep. I finished it by 6 o'clock in the morning. And I hadn't done that in years. And I was so moved by it that, while I was there, I was talking to some people and I was like, I love what I do as a leadership consultant. But I was I don't like the way I was doing it. I need to find a different way to do it that serves a real need. And it was, me doing a lot of self-reflective work. I started thinking about, okay, well, how do I, what are the challenges I faced when I was working and I know other women faced? And that's how I came about it. And I started reading a lot of Jungian psychology, which I love. I'm a big Jung fan, Carl Jung. I love his work, and that's inspired me a lot, actually. And I use a lot of his work in my coaching and also a lot of the work that I do, things that I write. Very much a lot of his body of work has inspired me in my thinking and how I approach this type of work that I do with women.
So tell us about that Artemis Method.
Sure. So essentially, the idea behind it is are you familiar with the idea of the masculine and feminine principle?
You may need to explain.
Okay, so I'll explain what that is. So essentially, if you think of the best visual depiction of that is the yin and yang symbol, right? It's the balance of opposites, one being masculine, the other being feminine, and you bring the two together, and you have it's called the Great Tao, and it's essentially, in Confucian philosophy, is the idea of wholeness. And so the idea behind the Artemis Method is for specifically women, because that's the population I'm working with right now, but it could also be applied to men, that to be a whole person, there needs to be a balance of the two. You need to have the feminine and the masculine. And what I've seen over the years, and what I know I'm also guilty of because of my own education, is for a lot of women who've been very much educated in Western society, we have a very strong masculine principle that guides us, period. It guides everybody. And so and then the masculine principle, the idea behind it is achievement. It's goal orientation. It's just getting things done all the time. It's about just doing. While the feminine principle is more about receptivity. It's more of a quiet force. Equally strong, but it's more a quiet force. It's more about receptivity, and it's also more about being able to sit in discomfort. And that's the feminine principle. Now, essentially, both people, both men and women, have both. And now one can be more heightened than the other in either gender or sex. It doesn't really matter. However, what I, through my own research, a lot of the literature, and also the work that I'm doing with women, what I've seen more and more is that the masculine principle has gotten so strong in a lot of professional women that it creates a bit of a disconnect and an imbalance within us. And that was my situation, quite frankly. And many other women, professional women, whether lawyers, doctors, or whatever, teachers, it's a similar dichotomy in which you have this desire, like when you're taught to go to do really well, excel, and just achieve and achieve and achieve. But at some point you reach a point where you're like, okay, there's more to my life than this, than just doing all these things. Like, it doesn't necessarily bring actual satisfaction within. And there was a really interesting article a few months ago that a friend shared with me, and it was funny. It was a very long article, but it actually touched on that very well. That they found a lot of young, professional women in their mid-30s were very unhappy. These are people with many degrees, making a lot of money, but at the core there was this general unhappiness because everything we felt that we've been told to do, we've done it, and then you reach a place and you're like, I'm miserable, and so there's a bit of a disconnect and a general unhappiness and feeling stuck and not knowing what to do. And this is what this model is about. This method, the Artemis Method, is about how do you start exploring that in a way that's non-judgmental. It's not about, you did anything wrong. Actually, you did everything you were supposed to do, but you've reached a place and now you can make a decision. You can continue going the way you are going, or you could decide, okay, there are maybe other ways for me to find meaning in my life, for me to find self-actualization opportunities, other things that bring me joy, and how do I start balancing myself so that I'm not just working, 18-hour days, but then if I do other things, it's really in purpose of just working, but that there are other aspects of my life that I actually want to make sure that they're integrated into who I am as a person.
From what you just said, to sum up your work, it's helping people get unstuck and self-actualization.
Right.
And I understand that's probably very, very challenging work. Like, what are the challenges?
It's hard. So coaching. So for example, I do both one-on-one coaching. And right now, that's the past year. That's really, I've been focusing more on that, and there's a reason for it. I really wanted to work with a few women in a very deep way to really understand a lot of the challenges that they're dealing with, and that's going to help inform, more of the work I'm going to write and more of the consulting work that I'm going to do for companies. When I have these great case studies, right? And so, and I've seen and heard crazy things that I can't discuss here, but where people's lives completely get railroaded. And it's not just them. Often families are affected, and a lot of it had to do with just lack of self-awareness. Always doing and doing and doing, but not really taking the time to pause, reflect, ask yourself questions, and deal with your emotions and understand that you have emotions that need to be dealt with. So for me, I find that being able to, go through a process with someone. It's one-on-one, and it's usually, I work with someone between usually 6 to 9 months, and it's, you go deep. And I tell people it's not for everyone. Sometimes you'll confront things that are not always very pleasant about yourself, but you'll also learn amazing things about yourself. You'll uncover, strengths and perspectives that you have that you never really gave yourself the time to really reflect on these things. But I approach it in such a way where it's very structured. There's a process, a discovery process during the first few weeks. And based on that, I use psychometric tools. Essentially what those are, they're assessment tools. I'm certified in several assessments tools to give the person, and that helps to give someone an idea of, what are my strengths, for example? Like, what are the things that matter to me? So some of the tools I use, for example, one of them is like, what motivates you? What are your values and what motivates you? And the more you are clear on that, the more you're aligned with what you're doing. So if there is and the happier you are with what you're doing. And I've seen that. People who they're aligned, like what they value, what motivates them is reflected in their job. You could think it's the most boring job in the world, but if they're in alignment, they're fine. Like, I wouldn't do this job, but they're in alignment, so they're perfectly happy. But like when you're not in alignment, when your values and what motivates you are completely not aligned with what you're doing every day, which was my case when I was in New York, that's when your misery, like it won't go away until you find some level of alignment or fulfillment. And there's another tool that I love. It's called the derailer tool, and it's essentially when you're under stress, what triggers, what are the things you should really be mindful of when in stressful situations, and it basically assesses you for these triggers. And so the more you're aware of them, the more you know, okay, well, this is the situation I'm in right now. I can look out for these things I already know, and these are tools that they've been around for decades, and they're completely valid and reliable as far as psychological tools go.
So what you're saying is, in order to self-actualize, you need to be aware of yourself.
That's the first step. That's the first. The first step is self-awareness, because it really, and it's, I think, the hardest. And I think something we all struggle with that, right? Especially when you're always, we're always being pushed to just keep going every day. And so for me, I'll give you an example. For myself, what I had to do is, and I literally, I actually, after I came back from New York and I gave up my apartment, I moved in with a friend, beautiful house in Boston. And I spent several months just not doing anything. And that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, not do anything. And that was the first step. And it's actually outlined here in the book. But the first step essentially was to learn to just be still. And it's actually something that a lot of religious, like Buddhism and other philosophies or religions, they use that. It's almost like a cleansing, an idea of like you have to cleanse yourself and learn how to quiet your mind. And so that's when I started meditating. I learned how to meditate, and it was really, really hard. And I found whatever opportunities I could to learn how to still my mind. And learning how to still my mind, I also learned how to still my emotions, because I used to get anxiety and panic attacks at work. And a lot of it came from like this constant fight flight mode that, I was in. My limbic system was always kind of like just flashing, because, you're working in certain environments, high pressure, you're always moving quickly. People are super critical. If you're not necessarily cut out for that, for some people, it's not an issue. Like, they do just fine. For me, I could do the work, but it was just the environment was not good for me. And I think part of my story was that at the time I was telling myself a story that this is okay. Like, you can learn to deal with the anxiety attacks or the panic attacks because you can do the work. But then at some point I couldn't tell myself that story anymore, right? So there was a lack of self-awareness on my end to the fact that like I was taking on more than I was able to do. And it takes a lot of courage to admit that, especially when you've, you come from a very high achieving family or culture, or you're really pushed to always, achieve. And so when you decide, okay, this is not necessarily for me, you do get a lot of people are just like, okay, what are you doing? But that is the first step, to really just learn how to pause, reflect, ask yourself questions, and quiet your mind. In quieting your mind, you learn how to quiet your physical self as well.
So in your business, do you find that the women and the men that come to you, that they have hit a point in their life where they are struggling to push forward, or like is it more like that preventative, like they see the need and they're trying to get ahead of the game?
I really wish that was the case. I really wish people took preventive measures, but no, it's usually people come when it's like a crisis and it's bad, and that's where sometimes it can be. And I don't just work with anyone, and I say that because coaching is a symbiotic process, right? The flow of energy goes both ways, and so some people I can't work with them, and I'll know that very quickly. So people usually come when things have been really bad, and I've also noticed something. Usually, there's something somewhat similar in that we can connect, because there's this recognition, which is funny because sometimes I'm like, how does this happen? But it just does. They find me. But generally there's a huge crisis, whether it's personal life, family, professional. For some people it's, they've missed promotions many times, and a lot of it did not have to do with the work, but it was like their interpersonal relationships, and the issues with that was that negative little voice in your head always telling you you're not good enough, or that people don't like you, or so, and then that starts to affect you when you're in a meeting and you should be focusing on what the person's saying, but yet you're sitting here really thinking about, did I say that right? Mm-hmm. And then it starts to impact your performance. So usually it's when things are pretty bad, that's when people come, which is too bad, but that's usually how it goes.
So there's somebody out there listening right now that they haven't hit that moment in their life yet, but they're maybe like just going through the motions, right?
Right.
What would you say to that person?
Wow. The first thing I would say is that know that you're not alone. A lot of people have either dealt with this or they are dealing with this. If you are ready to seek help when you have the resources, don't delay, don't wait until you're in crisis point. I honestly, I waited to crisis point. Don't wait until it's become a crisis. Try to get support, whether it's working with a coach, or a counselor. One thing I want to make sure is clear to people, there is a difference between counseling and coaching. I tell people counseling is a very easy way to think about it. Often counseling, I think, is a bit more, it looks more backward, while coaching is more forward. It's more like, okay, what actions can you start putting into place? But if it's a psychological or a mental health issue, then you need to see a mental health professional, because a lot of coaches are not, but some coaches are. Some coaches do have mental health background. So I would say seek help. If you don't have the resources to do that, there are a lot of books out there. There are a lot of podcasts. You can find things that you could listen to that could be helpful. You can do something like go to yoga. That helps a lot, actually. That was one of the first things before I actually started meditating, I started doing yoga, because it helped me to be more in tune with my body and to also just be more present. Because even before you can become self-aware, you need to be present and not worrying about the past or fearful of the future, right? So, so things like doing yoga, learning how to meditate, getting some books and literature out there. If you don't have a lot of resources, you can, defer to some of those things. Retreats, there are some that are not so expensive. You can go on a weekend retreat, but self-care, start with that. That's the simplest thing. Actually, if you start with self-care before it gets really bad, it may never get to crisis point. You can learn to manage it, but making the time for self-care is hard because we're in a crush it culture. It's usually crushing it all the time. It's like, can we not be crushing it all the time? And there's this, this desire to always, it's like, hey, people, it's not, Armageddon is not here. The world is not over. But, it is a constant struggle to learn how to slow down when everybody else around you is going at, warp speed. The question is, at some point, everybody's going to crash. It's a question of when do you crash, or if you crash.
Yeah.
And if you can stop yourself, you can start to kind of pull back a bit. It certainly helps.
So I think that starting with yoga is great advice, because what I found personally is when I'm telling myself the wrong stories, what yoga has done is taught me that I didn't even stop to breathe for like a week. So how am I even going to be aware of what's going on in my mind or things like that? So I feel like that's really great advice.
Thank you. And I really feel that the more people start doing these things, the more we'll be able to really unleash our potential in ways we never imagined. I feel like we're like scratching the surface of like our capacity as people. And I sometimes wonder, do people realize that? We are like operating here, most of us. We probably could be operating here. But in operating here is not necessarily doing things all the time, but sometimes it's like literally creating the space to let good ideas come to you. Let the collision of ideas happen. And that's what I like about environments like this. And actually one of the reasons I moved to Miami was that I like the fact that they're investing in innovation, they're investing in building these types of ecosystems, but at the same time, it's a bit of a slower pace than New York. And also the weather is wonderful. So I felt like it was, for me, a better balance. Although I do miss going walking in the forest in Massachusetts. You don't have that as much here, but you have the beach. But it was really an opportunity to kind of learn how to slow down. So that was very intentional on my end, which is part of the reason why I decided to move down here.
Yeah. Well, Milka, thank you very much for being here and talking with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Can you tell us where we can find your book? Tell us about your book, where we can find it, and where we can find you online.
I'll tell you everything. Okay, so my book is called Your Journey to Self-Redefinition, Women's Guide to Transitions. Essentially, you can find it at Amazon.com as well as BarnesandNobles.com and iBooks. It's everywhere books are sold. And in Miami, as of tomorrow, it's going to be at Books and Books in Coral Gables, so you can go pick it up there. And you can also check out my website, which is ArtemisWomenLeaders.com, and women plural, leaders plural, so Artemis Women Leaders. My book's also on the website. If you're interested in anything if you want to learn more about the work that I do as a coach, you can also get information on my website and how to reach me. I'm also on Instagram at We Are Artemis. I'm on Twitter at Artemis1. And also on Facebook. So I'm actually everywhere online. You can find me on all the social media handles. And so just if you want to follow me, that would be great. And so the whole idea with the book was really to create a compilation of what I did is I essentially wanted to create something that both inspired, but also, so there are a lot of quotes in there, but also has activities, little things that you can start doing for yourself, to understand your values, to understand what matters to you, right? And also to be inspired by stories of people who've, done amazing things. And two women leaders that I do talk about here, actually several of them, who I find they're very balanced and they build businesses that were very balanced. Oprah, Martha Stewart, Anita Roddick, who is she created The Body Shop in the UK. So these are all women who went down this path of they built businesses or empires really that were very strong on the feminine principle, and they very much embody that. And so it's a combination of a lot of things, but the idea behind it is to inspire and also to get people to take action, to decide, to think about it, reflect, but think about, okay, what can I do for myself? And what I do for myself eventually will also help the community that I'm part of. And how do you affect change? By first, you start with yourself. Not to change other people, but you actually, the old cliche, you be the change that, you want to see in the world. It's true.
It's true. And that's a great place to end it, Milka. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Tyler. And thank you, Michael.
For more episodes, visit innovationcity.co. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And if you're in Miami, visit us on Thursday nights. Details are at venturecafemiami.org. And be sure to connect with us on social at We Are Slam and at Venture Cafe MIA. Thanks for listening.
This is where it all begins.